VASCDD from the U.S. Administration for Community Living, Department of Health and Human Services, Washington, D.C. 20201. Grantees undertaking projects with government sponsorship are encouraged to express freely their findings and conclusions, points, and opinions do not therefore necessarily represent the organization. And I'm going to stop my sharing here, and I'm going to present our presenter today, who is John Cano from the Legal Aid Justice Center. And he is a senior organizer and has been working alongside several lawyers in his organization, supporting and educating the community on different topics. Previously, we had them present on our webinar for special education and knowing your rights, but John Cano is also very involved in the advocacy arena. He graduated from Ferrum College, and he has joined the Legal Aid Justice Center since 287. In his free time, he enjoys information for providers.
Should be considered legal advice is just a legal overview. And then for today, we'll be focusing on what we as the Legal Aid Justice Center provide for our community, and also we work alongside our undocumented community, go over the rapid response hotline, the resources that exist on our website, and what community leaders, such as yourself and service providers, can do. As we know, there's a lot of fast-changing policies happening in the immigration realm, but there's a lot of things that we can do where folks that are non-attorneys, including myself and perhaps you in attendance, we can do and provide services to our immigrant siblings. And then we'll wrap up with questions and answers. So just a quickly about LAJC and what we do as a nonprofit and also as a legal aid organization. We do provide services to undocumented community members, specifically for bond. So that's for any Virginia resident that's 200% of the poverty line, is not represented, bond eligible, and subject to free legal consults, especially from our rapid response hotline, which we'll go over later in the presentation. We also provide other consults and legal services depending on the geographical area, as we do provide services in Northern Virginia and Central Virginia, specifically for our immigrant justice team. We also provide advocacy at the local and state levels through community organizing. We also have other programs that help in different areas, such as housing and consumer justice and health and public benefits. With our housing team, we focus on eviction prevention and consumer fraud cases. For health, we focus on enrollment in Medicaid and other public benefits. Also, we have the rapid response hotline. For those who may not be familiar with the rapid response hotline, this is a hotline that operates here in the Commonwealth of Virginia for individuals who have seen ICE arrive at their house, at their workplace, at a public space, or in their car. They can call this number Monday through Sunday from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m., where individuals can call to ask for support, and the hotline operators will provide on-the-spot guidance of their rights in any scenario. These operators are trained to provide that support and letting them know what they should do in case they encounter ICE in either the house, at the car, at the workplace, or at a public site. Not only does the hotline help with that immediate response, but it also provides another resource where for any friends or loved ones that are detained and in our service areas that we mentioned earlier, they can get a consult with one of our attorneys. And with those consults, it could also mean representation if we have the bandwidth and capacity. And then two, for bond motions. So these are two critical functions that are being offered as that we know there's not enough immigration attorneys across the Commonwealth that focus on detention work. This hotline is created to help individuals that are Spanish speaking. Um, so for folks who are looking ways to provide support, direct support, there's always opportunities to become a hotline volunteer. And you can scan that QR code if you would like to volunteer and provide this important, crucial support to our immigrant siblings. So a little bit about LAJC and what resources we have developed. We have a Spanish language resource and an English resource available on our website, justiceforall.org, where folks are reminded what they should do in case they encounter with ICE. Our website also has information where individuals can complete a power of attorney, which is a document that states who can be in charge of their finances, whether they have a bank, a car, own property, and what they would like that designated person to do with those said assets in case they are detained by ICE or possibly deported. With the children, there's a different document that's called a standby guardianship. A standby guardianship is similar to a power of attorney, but it focuses on the well-being of the child. Now, with this standby guardianship, one has to go to the juvenile domestic court to file that paperwork. And this would take effect once the triggering decision takes place. So in this instance, in regard to immigration, if one or two parents are detained, whoever that authorized individual will be in charge of the children, they would have to go to the courthouse, file that paperwork, and then from there, they will take custody, standby guardianship of that child or children. How that is rescinded if one or two parents are no longer in custody of immigration authorities. So with power of attorneys, it must be signed and notarized. Um, Power of attorneys, I will say, all that information and documents are available on our websites. And this is important as this will cover all individuals that you may be serving. So if you have any non-citizens or citizens that might have other concerns in your community that are wanting to have a power of attorney, they could call our office and request an appointment as well. Same with standby guardianships. We're also looking to provide these resources, power of attorneys, and also standby guardianships for folks in Arlington. And we'll be in contact with individuals in Arlington and how we're going to move forward with these services. Not only do we have the information of standby guardianships, power of attorneys, but we also have information regarding the red cards. Those famous cards that say on one side what your rights are if you interact with ICE, your rights under the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. One side is in Spanish, while the other side is in English. We have that available on our website. And you can also visit ilrc.org/red-cards to order some. ILRC stands for the Immigration Legal Resource Center. We have also developed a toolkit for emergency contact list. And this will be important in case, and God forbid, it were to happen, if someone is separated from their family. And this emergency contact list will have all the vital information of that family, the health, any possible health conditions that they have, information about the immigration case, any medical needs that they may need, what's the child's favorite toy, favorite comfort food. And this will be important to develop and share with key partners, such as the school, the church, your primary care provider, or any nonprofit or organization that you may frequently visit. As I mentioned, we also provide the standby guardianship. And with our standby guardianship on our website, it has one side that is in Spanish and one side that is in English. So I mentioned the hotline is already developed and it's currently serving Northern Virginia and Central Virginia, with it being Charlottesville, Albemarle, and other counties around. Excuse me. This is just an example of how to navigate our website. So if you go to justiceforall.org, you want to click on what we do. And under immigration, you also want to click the rapid response toolkit. I also want to mention with the rapid response toolkit, we also have up-to-date information on anything that has changed in Virginia. So we also have talked about Governor Youngkin's Executive Order 47 that encourages localities to enter into agreements with ICE, known as 287Gs. We also talk about guidance on the Memorandum of Understanding that the IRS entered with the Department of Homeland Security. We also talk about public charge and accessing information for undocumented individuals. I will say that we're currently going to be updating the resources on health access as there's a lot of new information that is rolling out that will affect our immigrant siblings. And this right here is for individuals that want to develop their toolkit. They can click on this link and it will prop all the information such as the emergency list, emergency contact, power of attorney, and standby guardianship. As I mentioned, we have several different resources. We also have developed guidance for churches, schools, and this can even apply to nonprofits and hospitals on what to do if ICE were to show up at your place. This is merely guidance. This is not legal advice. Despite on January 20th that the Trump administration removed sensitive locations policy, which before January 20th stated that ICE should not enter schools, churches, or hospitals, as those were sensitive locations. But that's no longer the case. Despite that being rescinded, there's still some limits of what ICE cannot do. And it's important to know the difference between a private versus a public space. In a public space, that's any space where you and I can access. So if any place you and I can access, so can ICE. So for example, going into a restaurant, anyone can walk into the restaurant. That's considered public space. The waiting areas in the hospitals are considered a public space. Um, the sanctuary of a church is considered a public space. But in all these different areas, there's some areas where you and I don't have access that are considered private spaces. And because those areas are considered private, as well, ICE does not have the right to go in there. But it's very important to know those differences and train prospective staff to know a private and public space and to be familiarized with an administrative and judicial warrant. We have videos in Spanish and English, and we have guidance and one-pagers analysis on what can be done in every different scenario. And for service providers, it's important as we may run into this where we have a potential client or a community member calling in, asking for support as we're always community facing, right? We'll always get a plethora of questions that sometimes not might be fitted in exactly our service area. So we always want to paint the picture and provide these resources for y'all in case a client comes in asking questions. Um, in Virginia, there is two detention centers, one called Caroline Detention Center, the other one known as Farmville Detention Center. Caroline is located in Bowling Green, Virginia, and Farmville is located in Farmville, Virginia. So if any clients or community members were to come in and asking for support, not knowing where their friends or loved ones are at, individuals can look for that information by scanning this code, and it's called the ICE Detainee Locator. Um, is a great tool in case someone has been picked up by ICE. They would need to know their full name and date of birth and country of origin and put that information into the system. But with that being said, I do want to mention that it's a little bit complicated because sometimes ICE and the way they upload information, it could be that the individual's first name was uploaded as their last name. Their last name might be uploaded as their first name, and their middle name will stay the same. And we know this is complicated because sometimes folks have a first name, a middle name, and two last names. So if that's the case, you're going to have to be playing the numbers game and inputting different combinations until that shows up. The easiest and quickest way to find out that person is by having their A number, which is a unique number that immigration assigns to any individual in any immigration process. It's always starts with the letter A, followed by a series of numbers. If they have that A number, you do not need to know their first name, their last name, their date of birth, or country of origin, as the A number is already tied to that person's name, full name, and country of origin. So if folks are coming and asking for legal assistance, there's two organizations that provide support. When it comes to detention centers, it's Amica Center, and there's their phone number, and you can also scan this QR code that will take them to their site. And also us as the Legal Aid Justice Center and bond proceedings, you can call us at 703-778-3450, or also scanning the QR code. So now we just want to talk about general concepts, and this is concepts that you can share or even practice at your perspective organizations to protect your clients, community members, or even staff. So everyone in the United States living in the country, whether they're documented or undocumented, have constitutional rights and those live under the Fourth and Fifth Amendment, where the Fourth Amendment allows unreasonable search and seizure from any entity. And where does the Fourth Amendment live and has the strongest protections? It's at our homes and at our private spaces. With the Fourth Amendment, it says that individuals need to have a warrant to enter spaces, not only a warrant, but more specifically, a warrant that's been issued by a judge or magistrate. Why? Because it has given justified probable cause by that judge or magistrate that they need to enter a particular space or search or individual or possibly seize any belongings. And the Fourth Amendment gives us protections that law enforcement or no other entities cannot enter our space unless they have a judicial warrant. And this can be confusing because in the immigration space, there's two terms that are always thrown around: administrative warrant and judicial warrant. Despite an administrative warrant having the name warrant itself, it's not an actual warrant. An administrative warrant, it's a document issued by Department of Homeland Security within that same agency allowing their own staff to go make an arrest. And as we can see in the Fourth Amendment, it says it protects people from body searches, searches of their belonging, and unreasonable seizures by the government. And as we can also see, it says it has to be issued by a judge or magistrate. Because the administrative warrant is not issued by a judge or a magistrate, ICE agents cannot enter the home unless they have a judicial warrant. Another right that we all have, regardless of immigration status, is the Fifth Amendment, where it contains the right for us to not self-incriminate. And this basically means we have the right to remain silent, and we have the right to speak with an attorney. So these are the most strongest protections that we all have, regardless of immigration status. And as I wanted to also mention that these protections can apply in different circumstances depending on the scenario. Whether you're at the home or at the street, there's different outcomes, as in the street is a public space, while the home or a work lobby could be considered a private space. And also this has different determinations based on if it's a criminal or immigration procedure. Now, I wanted to go over a little bit about what is a public versus private space. And this is important to know for us as service providers, as we're always interacting with clients of different backgrounds. As we mentioned earlier, we have legal protections that come under the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. ICE is considered law enforcement. They are considered the immigration police. There's no need to give them information that will harm you, including showing a passport from another country. As I mentioned earlier, there's two warrants that are always thrown around in regards to the immigration world: an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant. And this is important, especially for service providers that have spaces, to be familiar with these two documents. As I mentioned, in the home, an administrative warrant, which is here on my left-hand side, and it will be highlighted, or it would always say U.S. Department of Homeland Security. At the home, they have no right to enter with this document because it's not authorized or signed by a judge or federal magistrate. We'll go over a bit about a public space. So in the private place or at the house, an administrative warrant is not suffice to enter the home. What may be suffice, and I want to say may be suffice in entering the home, is a judicial warrant. Why may it not be suffice, even though the Fourth Amendment says if they have a judicial warrant signed by a judge or a federal magistrate, they can enter? The reason being, despite having the approval of the judge or the magistrate, there's a few other items that we have to look out for. And the judicial warrant, it will always have an address and a timestamp. So let's say they have the judicial warrant, it's signed by a judge or a federal magistrate. But let's say you live or your office is at 123 Main Street, Arlington, Virginia. But your office is 124 Main Street, Arlington, Virginia. Despite having a judicial warrant signed by a judge, since they have the wrong address, they cannot enter your establishment because that judicial warrant that was signed by a judge was issued to search 123 Main Street, Arlington, not 124 Main Street, Arlington. So we also have to be on the lookout for the address and make sure that it's correct. And many of our spaces as service providers, we have a public space and we have a private space. So another thing we have to look at, they can enter any public space, just like you and I can, but they cannot access our private space. Let's say the break room for employees, or if you provide care for your clients, whether it's medical or any type of one-on-one attention, they would need a judicial warrant to enter that space. So in that regard, it would have to have the address that's correct and also the exact location. So let's say you have a meeting space for clients. It would have to say suite 1A, and that has to be explicit in the judicial warrant to enter that space. So please be familiarized with these two documents. Identify a staff person who would be the point of contact in case ICE were to show up. View your spaces now to see if there's any signs that say private or public space. And if you already know what spaces are private, but it's not explicit to anyone walking into your office, you might want to consider and have conversations. So we make signs that say that this space is private. And this is also found on our website on guidance for schools, hospitals, and churches. So, what can service providers or community leaders do when we ourselves are not immigration attorneys? So, there's a great thing that we can do despite us not being attorneys. We can provide legal information. We cannot provide legal advice. There is a thin line, but we can still provide legal information regarding immigration, regarding housing, regarding health, regarding anything that may require an attorney. We can provide just the basic overview of what the law says. So, how do I know what I'm doing is not considered legal advice? The minute someone is applying legal concepts or what the law says to an individual's case, that is considered legal advice. It's a very thin line, but that is considered legal advice. On the flip side, legal information, let's say someone comes into your space and asks, I want to qualify for X service, and I believe I do based on my circumstances. If you just say the law states individuals qualify for this service based on X circumstances, you're not telling them that they do qualify. You're just explaining that the law says that people who qualify for this may qualify. You're not applying what the law says to that particular individual's case. You're just explaining it. So that's the biggest difference. You can't apply what the law says and interpret it to that individual's particular case. Other information that we can provide is power of attorneys and standby guardianships. The form filling itself is not considered practice of law, but it has to be reviewed and approved by an attorney. Providing accompaniment to courts, ICE check-ins, or going into immigration court is other services that we can do that's not considered legal advice. Sharing information to help individuals avoid scams is another resource that we can do that's not considered legal advice. Excuse me. We can also provide information to help guide individuals on how to navigate immigration issues, such as where can I check if I have immigration court? My loved one was detained and was taken by ICE. I don't have information about my immigration case. or even connecting them to services to look for bond relief. These are all different tools that we can have at our disposals to share with our clients and community members. Yeah. And I kind of already jumped it, but legal advice versus legal information. Legal advice has to be under direct supervision of an attorney. As I mentioned earlier, applying general information or legal rules to a specific case at a specific time. Legal advice is also telling someone what they should do in their particular case. While as legal information, and this is something you and I can do as non-attorneys, is providing just legal information on what the law says, explaining how that legal system works, but not tailoring it to that individual's specific case. Examples about this is know your rights presentations and answering questions of how the legal process generally works. As I mentioned, it's a very thin line, but this is the difference between legal advice and legal information. And I want to emphasize that this legal advice versus legal information is only focused on Virginia, as this is what the Supreme Court of Virginia has ruled. So Maryland and DC have different guidance on what is legal advice and legal information. So I just wanted to share that. So if you have any friends, loved ones, or maybe your service provider organization has other offices in DC and Maryland, they might want to get familiar on what their Supreme Court says of legal advice versus legal information. And it's usually framed as unauthorized practice of law. And here it is, the definition of unauthorized practice of law. We won't read it completely because it's some boring language that lawyers like to use and judges, but we covered most of that already. So the general definition of unauthorized practice of law is any person or entity that engages in the practice of law when representing another, whether it's by words or conduct, and by doing the following: undertaking for compensation, whether it's direct or indirect, giving advice or counsel to an entity or person involving the application of legal principles to their particular case, drafting or completing legal documents, representing anyone in front of a tribunal, or even negotiating their rights on behalf of someone. So what is not considered unauthorized practice of law here in Virginia? Providing translation services, pro se representation, which means individual representation, serving as a mediator, arbitrator, conciliator, facilitator, serving as a fiduciary, or acting as a lobbyist. Selling legal forms is not also considered practice of law. Another exception of what is not considered unauthorized practice of law is teaching law or providing legal information, as we're doing today, negotiating settlements, or preparing taxes to the extent the IRS mentions in state law. So that was just a quick general overview of what we can do as non-attorneys or non-legal organizations. And another great resource to know, especially with us providing direct services to our immigrant siblings or clients that may have immigrant family members, whether it's their spouse or extended family, is help them to avoid scams. When it comes to immigration or even just any law, attorneys must be licensed to practice law in the US. Now, in Latin America, all notaries are attorneys. Here in the US, that's not the case. So that's why we see a lot of notario fraud or notary fraud is that there's a misconception that notaries here in the States are attorneys, because in home countries for Latin America, that is the case. Here in the United States, that's not how it works. So represented individuals should also understand, if they have sought legal advice or representation, that individual must understand what is being done with their case and why before making the next step. Any individual that has representation should understand the document before they're signing it. So no individual should sign a document without them knowing whether that document is just in English or another language they don't understand. They should not be signing if they do not understand, and they should ask for that document to be translated in their language of preference. Good practice is any person that has representation should be given copies of all their applications and relevant documents to their case. Individuals that are represented are also under the right to request a receipt for each payment that they have done to said law firm. Represented parties should also seek help from their attorney or other organizations if they're being threatened, um, or harming them for the immigration case. And most importantly, and this applies to all types of law, the represented party has the right to end that representation, and they should also be informed on any new status update of their case. So this is something very important to share with our client communities or folks that seek services at our prospective organizations. So how can we help our clients or individuals seeking services? How can we help them avoid scams? So for immigration, there is pro bono legal service providers that can be visited at the following website, justice.gov. And I also want to talk about accredited reps. So when it comes to immigration, there's two types of individuals that can represent you in immigration proceedings. Of course, an immigration attorney, and then secondly, it's a Department of Justice accredited rep. An accredited rep under the Department of Justice is an individual that has went through rigorous training on immigration law and that has passed the test, excuse me, of immigration law to represent individuals, whether it's partially or fully. Despite them not having a license to practice law, the only reason they can represent individuals half or fully is because they're being supervised by an attorney and they have received the training by the Department of Justice. How do I know that someone is an affiliated accredited rep with the Department of Justice? Is that these individuals will always be tied to a nonprofit organization. They won't be a practice solely practitioner. They won't be part of a private law firm. It's always with a nonprofit organization. For example, Catholic Charities has accredited rep programs. Just Neighbors has accredited reps. Church of Fairfax is in the process of getting accredited reps. So each of these individuals have affiliation with a nonprofit organization, and you can even call that number 703-305-9029 to find that full list. For immigration attorneys, there's also this lip-served called AILA, American Immigration Laws Associate. And also it's important for each individual to check the status of their attorney and see if they're in good standing with their bar, with that state bar that they're registered in. So what can we further do as service providers? We can encourage folks to create an emergency plan an emergency plan with their churches, neighbors, community groups, and families in case of an ICE raid, in case someone is detained, whether it's themselves, a friend, or a loved one, or they're at risk of deportation. It's important to encourage our communities, clients, community members, friends, and loved ones to have all their immigration documents secure at one place in case the worst happens, being detained by ICE. The reason being is having the full portfolio and documents of their immigration case will help when they are in the need to seek legal consult of an immigration attorney. So, what resources can we share as service providers? We can make a plan, as we shared earlier, by visiting our website, justiceforall.org, developing that toolkit, having that power of attorneys for properties and finances, having that standby guardianship, and obtaining your immigration information by visiting EOAR and establishing and requesting that FOIA. But that wraps up the presentation. Happy to take some Q&A regarding the toolkit or any other question.
If anyone has any questions, please include them in the chat. We also have the Q&A feature. And I'm also going to post the poll that we have. John, I guess I'll ask a question in terms of any patterns of like something that is very prevalent right now in terms of help that organizations are asking for. Is there anything specific that you're seeing, and anything that you feel like, you know, we are handling this matter right now and handling this specific topic because it's really requested?
Yeah, one of the most requests that we're getting on right now, especially being here in Virginia, is their rights when encountering the police, as there's some jurisdictions that have entered agreements with ICE, which is 287G, which is a subsection of the Immigration Naturalization Act that will allow local authorities to enter into agreements to enforce immigration law. I will say, with us being in Northern Virginia, so Arlington, Fairfax, Prince William, Alexandria, Arlington, none of those counties have 287G agreements. In Arlington County, just 2 days ago, Tuesday, the board of supervisors actually voted to remove a section that allowed them to collaborate with ICE. So Arlington County is no longer going to be contacting ICE. That was a great effort by community members and La Colectiva in pressuring the board to remove that section, which was the infamous section that was Section 7. The only county in Northern Virginia that has an agreement with ICE is Loudoun County, and that's under the service warrant agreement. So to be going back to your question, that's one of the requests is what are my rights when encountering the police and what is 287G? As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's going to be some changes regarding health and public benefits that we're currently keeping an eye on. So we know that's going to be a request, and we know that's going to something that's going to hit our communities pretty bad. So we'll be providing that guidance and can provide know your rights on that as well.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a few more questions here. Thank you for info on Thank you so much for the info on scams. How much of an issue is this? How can we check to make sure that our attorney has filed the papers we have provided to him?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Um, how much of an issue this no, notarial fraud or immigration fraud is pretty relevant. With the main reason being one, not only because of the practice of Latin America and notarios and attorneys that go hand in hand, but also recognizing that there's not a lot of immigration attorneys around to help every individual. So there's a lot of folks scamming on social media, sharing that they'll help with their immigration case, and that's not the case. So it's pretty prevalent. Um, and how to ensure that the attorney has filed the paperwork is by having those phone calls with their secretary, their front desk, and having those in-person visits to see what's going on with that individual's case. One thing that we always tell community members, despite having that attorney taking on their case, you are their boss. You're paying them for those services to be rendered to you. So if you're not satisfied with what they're doing or they're not responsive to you, you can end that agreement. Um, and you always can shop around and end that contract with that attorney.
Okay, we have another one. Where can we find the list of immigration resources to share, like the legal services in your presentation?
Yeah, I am happy to share the slideshows and the decks with the Independent Center so that can be
Yep,
shared with you all.
it'll be on our landing page, and we'll also have fact sheets made for this presentation, so all providers can access the fact sheets that will also include those resources on our Bienvenidos landing page, and I added the link. And then we have a few in the Q&A. Is rapid response only for those who are Latino or for any immigrant?
Well, that is a great question. So, for us as legal aid, we work predominantly with Spanish speaking communities, but there are other hotlines that are curtailed to our other immigrant siblings that speak other languages. So, Case Center, that was formerly known as NACASAC, has a national hotline that provides support to the AAPI community that Asian and Pacific Islander communities, so they have several languages at their disposal. Casa, Maryland, Casa, Virginia, their hotline is Spanish and I believe French Creole. So I can also share that list with the Independence Center that will share those hotlines as well.
Thank you. And then there's another in the Q&A. What happens to minor children if their parents slash guardians have been deported and or detained by ICE in the event that no standby guardianship paperwork has been completed?
That is a great question. So at that point, that's where child service protections would come in place as they're no longer having a direct guardian. And as we know, that's troubling to hear. So that's where we always encourage folks to develop that emergency plan, that standby guardianship, or in other states, it just might be a power of attorney.
So do you suggest that people in our community that are just trying to make sure that they're always covered have this document filed with the school
Yes, that's correct. We
as a main
encourage,
source?
yes, we encourage folks to file whether it's a power of attorney, standby guardianship with the schools, their primary doctors, and their faith, or any area that they frequently visit where they have interactions with them and their children. And I will say, with sharing the power of attorney or standby guardianship, like for primary care providers or health clinics, they will accept that document, but they might ask you to fill a supplemental form as they have their own internal resources and guidance. So that's also something to share with community members.
Okay. What are you, there's another one. What are you seeing related to school attendance?
It's another great question. In the beginning of this new administration, we did see a decline in school attendance by children of immigrant families. We saw that all across Northern Virginia, especially after they removed the sensitive location policy. But several jurisdictions came out with proclamations and meetings of how they're going to protect students. So we have seen attendance at a higher level. And I would say the advocacy of the parents and made a huge difference, and of course, active school board members too.
Right. Is the power of attorney or standby guardianship expensive?
No, and that's another issue that we're seeing with notaries or those multi-services agencies, that they are charging a high price for these services. With these type of documents, they're not expensive. According to Virginia code, notaries can only charge X amount of dollar per page. I don't want to give the exact number because I can't recall. But for us as Legal Aid Justice Center, like these services are free of charge.
Awesome. Says, since most of us are providers, we learned from the Legal Aid Justice Center that we should not include information about documentation status in our notes. Can you please, um, sorry, speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So just good common practice. If service providers, nonprofit organizations only collect the information that is required for your internal records or for your grant deliverables. Um, so if you're just collecting information that just is good for you to know, but it's not relevant to anything else, there's no need to ask that extra information. Um, so that's just good practice, or even possibly codify um, folks that you're serving. Like, for example, if you have asked questions of your country of origin, you might want to consider codifying that. So, like, one means Guatemala, two means El Salvador. But if you don't need to collect that type of information, it's just good practice not to keep that on record.
Just double checking that we don't have any extra questions that we might have missed. This is the last call for questions before we end our webinar. But thank you so much, John, for being here today and presenting on this very important topic as we prepare ourselves for the year and then the next school year, and supporting our community members. This has been very, very resourceful and helpful in trying to give out this information to all our providers as they lead, many of the families to resources. But thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate you and everyone for supporting our project.
Of course, it's a pleasure, and thank each and one of you for being present and for all the amazing work you're providing to clients in the overall community in Northern Virginia.
Thank you, ASL interpreters, and thank you, everyone. And we will see you at the next provider webinar, the third Thursday of every month. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, ASL
One last
interpreters.
piece. This is Sherry. I'm with the ECMB, and the next meeting was scheduled for Juneteenth, which is a federal holiday. So we will not have that meeting, and we will resume these webinars after a summer break. Thank you.